Hello and welcome to our podcast, episode number 47, Explosive Thriller of a Bomb Squad's Mentally Stressful Mission. I'm Timothy, and I am here with my good friend Thomas. Tonight, we're going to discuss a film called The Hurt Locker. There will be spoilers. The Hurt Locker is a 2008 American war thriller film directed by Catherine Bigelow about an Iraq war explosive ordnance disposal team who faces psychological reactions to stress while dealing with insurgent targets. Well, Thomas, so did you enjoy The Hurt Locker?
Well, Tim, I have to say that I didn't enjoy it as much as you did. It wasn't terrible by any means, but I found myself a bit bored at times. The pacing felt off, and there were moments when I thought they could have delved deeper into certain characters or situations. That being said, I do appreciate the authenticity of the filming locations and the intense action sequences.
Interesting perspective, Tom. I actually quite liked it. For me, the pacing was just right. It kept you on edge without feeling overwhelmed by nonstop action. And while I agree that there were moments where we could have learned more about certain characters or their backstories, I think that added to the overall sense of realism and immersion in the story.
Well, Tom, perhaps our differing opinions on pacing stem from our personal preferences when it comes to thrillers. I typically prefer more character development and slower burning tension rather than non-stop action sequences that seem designed primarily for adrenaline rushes. Don't get me wrong. Those scenes were well executed, but they didn't necessarily move the story forward in a meaningful way for me.
I see your point, Thomas. But for me personally, I found those action sequences really engaging and thrilling, which added to my overall enjoyment of the film. As for character development, I thought they did a decent job with introducing us to our main characters, especially Sergeant James, played by Jeremy Renner, who was kind of the centerpiece of this story. His bravado and risk-taking behavior were certainly intriguing, but also showed his vulnerability at times, which added depth to his character.
I agree that Jeremy Renner delivered a solid performance as Sergeant James Timothy, and there were moments where we got glimpses into his past or motivations for taking such risks during missions. However, I felt like those insights weren't fully explored enough to really connect with him on an emotional level. It was almost as if the filmmakers wanted us to appreciate his skill set without delving too deeply into who he is as a person beyond being part of this high-stress unit.
I see your point about wanting more emotional connection to Sergeant James Thomas. But for me, it didn't really bother me that much because the film was more focused on showing us what life must be like for these bomb squad members rather than delving into their backstories in great detail. And I think they succeeded at that. The tension and danger were palpable throughout the movie, which made it quite an intense viewing experience overall.
Interesting perspective, Timothy. While I agree that some aspects of life as a bomb squad member were portrayed well, such as the camaraderie between team members or the constant fear of death during missions, there were moments where I felt like certain plot points weren't adequately resolved or explored further. For example, what happened to Beckham? We're led to believe he was going to be important later on. But then, his storyline seems to just disappear without any real resolution.
Thomas, as for your question about Beckham, I believe that was meant to represent the futility of their mission and how even someone who seemed innocent or sympathetic could ultimately be connected to insurgents in some way. It also showed the team's determination to root out potential threats, despite being emotionally invested in certain individuals they encounter during their deployment.
I can see your point about Beckham representing futility and emotional investment, Tim. But for me, personally, it felt like an unresolved thread that could have added depth to the story if handled differently. Overall, though, I appreciate our differing opinions on this movie as it shows how personal experiences and preferences can shape one's enjoyment of a film like The Hurt Locker.
Truly, Tom. That's what makes discussions about movies so interesting, because everyone brings their unique perspective to the table based on their life experiences and individual tastes. So while we may not have seen eye to eye on this particular film, I think it's important that we acknowledge its merits as well as its shortcomings, which makes for a more engaging conversation about cinema in general.
That's very true, Timothy. And speaking of unique perspectives, did you know that Mark Bowl actually based the screenplay for The Hurt Locker on his experiences embedded with a real-life explosive ordnance disposal team in Iraq? He spent weeks living and working alongside these brave individuals, which no doubt added a layer of authenticity to the story.
I didn't know that, Thomas. That's quite fascinating, actually, because it explains why the film feels so raw and realistic at times. It must have been quite an eye-opening experience for Bowl to witness firsthand what these soldiers go through on a daily basis while trying to disarm bombs and other deadly devices.
Indeed, Timothy. And it's always refreshing when filmmakers take the time to do their research properly instead of just relying on stereotypes or second-hand accounts. It really shows in how the characters were portrayed throughout the movie, especially Sergeant James, who was played by Jeremy Renner. The emotional depth and complexity he brought to his role must have been influenced by Bowl's experiences while embedded with the team.
Indeed, Thomas. I also read that during filming, the cast and crew worked closely with military advisors to ensure accuracy in their portrayal of life as a bomb squad member. Even the actors themselves underwent extensive training to prepare for their roles, which included learning how to disarm bombs safely and operating heavy machinery used by EO teams. This dedication to authenticity really paid off because the film feels grounded in reality even during its more intense moments.
That's very true, Tim. The level of detail and attention to accuracy really sets this movie apart from other war films that often rely on cliches or sensationalism to tell their stories. By focusing on the personal experiences and perspectives of those involved, both behind and in front of the camera, they've managed to create a compelling narrative that feels genuine rather than manufactured for entertainment purposes alone.
Exactly, Tom. And while we may have had different opinions about some aspects of The Hurt Locker, there's no denying its impact on popular culture and the way we perceive modern warfare. It's a captivating film that challenges us to confront uncomfortable truths about conflict and its consequences not only for soldiers, but also civilians caught in the crossfire.
That's very true, Timothy. And speaking of storytelling, one of the things that really impressed me about The Hurt Locker was its direction by Catherine Bigelow. She did an incredible job creating tension and suspense throughout the movie without relying too heavily on traditional action film techniques like shaky cameras or quick cuts. Her use of wide shots and long takes allowed us to really absorb our surroundings, which made the dangerous situations feel even more claustrophobic and intense.
Precisely, Thomas. Catherine Bigelow's direction was truly outstanding in this film. She managed to create a sense of realism without sacrificing the cinematic quality that makes for a compelling viewing experience. Her attention to detail, both in terms of setting and character development, really shines through in every scene. And I think her decision to shoot much of the movie in Jordan rather than using a green screen or other visual effects helped ground the story even further in reality.
That's an interesting point, Tim. Shooting on location always adds an extra layer of authenticity, especially when dealing with such sensitive subject matter like warfare. But I also think that Bigelow's use of practical effects played a big role in making The Hurt Locker feel so realistic. Instead of relying heavily on CG for explosions or other action sequences, she opted to use real explosives and pyrotechnics, which not only looked more convincing, but also added an extra layer of danger for both the cast and crew during filming.
That's true, Tom. The practical effects in this movie really paid off because they made the stunts feel more visceral and intense. It must have been quite a challenge for everyone involved to pull off some of these scenes without compromising safety or realism. And speaking of challenges, I read that Bigelow had to undergo extensive training herself before filming began in order to better understand the process and language used by EOD teams, which no doubt informed her direction throughout production.
That's very impressive. It just goes to show how dedicated she was to making this movie as authentic and accurate as possible. And it certainly shows in the final product. Despite its flaws, The Hurt Locker remains a powerful and thought-provoking film that offers unique insights into life as a soldier during wartime, while also challenging our perceptions about heroism and sacrifice.
Precisely, Tom. And I think it's important to remember that not everyone will connect with or enjoy every aspect of this movie, which is perfectly okay. But what makes The Hurt Locker so special is its ability to provoke discussion and reflection, even among those who don't necessarily agree on its merits. As film enthusiasts, it's our job to engage with these types of stories critically while also acknowledging the craftsmanship that goes into creating them.
Exactly, Timothy. And speaking of the cast, I thought they all did an incredible job bringing their characters to life on screen. Jeremy Renner's portrayal of Sergeant James in particular was nothing short of remarkable. He managed to convey a complex mixture of bravado and vulnerability that made his character both fascinating and relatable at the same time. The supporting cast was equally impressive, with Anthony Mackie as Sergeant Sanborn and Brian Girardi as Specialist Eldridge delivering standout performances that added depth to their respective roles within the team dynamic.
I completely agree, Tom. The ensemble cast in this film truly elevated it to another level. Each actor brought something unique to their character, which helped create an authentic sense of camaraderie among them, even when they were faced with incredibly tense situations. And as you mentioned, Jeremy Renner's portrayal of Sergeant James was nothing short of captivating. His ability to switch between intense focus during missions and moments of introspection really highlighted the psychological toll that their line of work took on them, both personally and professionally.
That's very true, Tim. And I think part of what made these characters so compelling was their relatability, despite being in such an extraordinary situation. They felt like real people dealing with the weight of their responsibilities, rather than just archetypes or stereotypes often found in war films. This humanization of the soldiers served to remind us that behind every uniform, there's a person with hopes, fears, dreams, and aspirations just like anyone else, regardless of their profession or circumstances.
Indeed, Tom. And speaking of character development, I thought it was particularly interesting how each member of the team had their own unique motivations for joining or remaining in this line of work, despite the obvious dangers involved. For Sergeant James, it seemed to be an adrenaline-fueled addiction to the thrill of disarming bombs, while Specialist Eldridge struggled with feelings of guilt over his own failures during missions and desire to redeem himself in the eyes of his teammates.
That's a very astute observation, Timothy. The complexities within each character really added depth to their relationships both personally and professionally, which made for some intense interpersonal dynamics throughout the film. It also served as a reminder that even within tight-knit groups like this one there can be underlying tensions or resentments that simmer just beneath the surface, waiting to boil over at any moment, especially under extreme stress or duress.
Indeed, Tom. And I think it's important for films like The Hurt Locker to challenge our perceptions about these characters and their experiences, because they often go unheard or misunderstood by those on the outside looking in. By humanizing them and giving them a voice through storytelling, we not only gain insight into their world, but also hopefully foster greater empathy towards those who serve our countries both at home and abroad, especially during times of conflict.
Truly, Timothy. And speaking of cultural contributions, I think it's important to consider how films like The Hurt Locker can shape public perception about warfare and those who fight in them. By presenting a more nuanced portrayal of soldiers as complex individuals with their own motivations, desires, and fears, rather than simply as faceless pawns in a larger geopolitical game, it challenges us to reevaluate our understanding of what heroism truly means in the context of war.
I couldn't agree more, Tom. The Hurt Locker is an example of how films can be used as a powerful tool for social commentary and reflection. It forces us to confront some uncomfortable truths about not only the nature of war itself, but also our own attitudes towards those who are tasked with protecting us. By humanizing these characters, we become more aware of their struggles both on and off the battlefield, which in turn helps foster empathy and understanding between different segments of society that might otherwise remain divided by politics or ideology.
That's a very gripping point, Tim, and it brings to mind another aspect of the Hurt Locker's cultural contribution, which is its portrayal of women in the military. While Sergeant James's female counterpart, Specialist Orpke, isn't as heavily featured in the story, she still plays a significant role in the team dynamics and proves herself to be just as capable as her male colleagues. This challenges traditional gender roles within the military setting and sends an important message about equality both on screen and off.
Well, said Tom, and it's worth noting that this was also one of the few major Hollywood films at the time to focus primarily on a male-dominated environment without relying on tired tropes or stereotypes when it came to portraying its female characters. Instead, they were shown as integral members of the team who brought unique perspectives and skills to their work, which added depth and authenticity to the story being told.
Truly, Tim. And I think this is indicative of a broader shift in filmmaking, where stories that were once considered niche or marginalized are now being given the attention they deserve. Films like The Hurt Locker serve as important markers in our cultural landscape, not only because they challenge our perceptions about warfare, but also because they force us to confront our own biases and preconceived notions about who gets to be seen and heard on screen.
Well, Tom, as we come to the end of our discussion about The Hurt Locker, it's clear that this film has left quite an impression on us both. I think it's safe to say that Catherine Bigelow has truly crafted a masterpiece with her directing, and Mark Bohl's screenplay is nothing short of brilliant in the way it humanizes these soldiers while still maintaining the intense thrill ride that we've come to expect from war films.
I couldn't agree more, Tim. While I might not have loved every aspect of The Hurt Locker, there's no denying its impact on both popular culture and our understanding of what it means to be a soldier in times of conflict. It's an important reminder that behind every uniform, every mission, and every sacrifice, there are real people with stories worth telling.
Exactly, Tom. And I think that's why films like The Hurt Locker are so important. They force us to confront our own biases and assumptions about the world around us, while also providing a platform for marginalized voices to be heard.
So if you haven't seen it yet,
we highly recommend giving The Hurt Locker a watch. And remember, as always, we love hearing your thoughts in the comment section below. be sure to like and subscribe if you enjoyed this episode. And until next time, happy film watching, everyone.